Hey guys, Generalist Programmer here. Welcome to Godot 2D Platformer Tutorial Part 2. We are going to basically be creating our player animations. We're going to bring in our player into our scene and hopefully have enough time to write some scripts to actually have some player movement. So just to show you, I've started off a very blank project over here in Godot. We first of all want to switch over into 2D mode, and you'll see on the far left I've already imported some of my assets which I essentially just created off this Inkscape project that I created. So I just drew a few animation frames, some platforms, a background, and basically a floor object, as well as just a coin. You can use whatever you want in your game or your project. Feel free to find some stuff online and use that as well. If you like, I'll leave this asset pack in the description and you can get that and then actually use the Inkscape file to export this out into your own project and start using it. So guys, let's jump into the Godot part of this tutorial and start getting our player into our scene. So to start off, what we need to do is we need to create a new scene called Players. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the plus icon over here and I'm going to hit save. Okay, I can't save yet. I need to actually add a node. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I want to add is a kinematic body 2D. So let's add that in. I'm going to rename this to player just to make a little bit more sense. And then what we want to do to create our animations is want to add a child node called animation or animated sprite. Then animated sprite, we want to just create new frames over here and we want to click over on animated sprite. So you'll see you've got different animations over here now. So the default one, I just want to rename that to idle, and idle is essentially going to be between a idle and a blink. So when we do play this, it'll essentially just have that going from the eye is open to the eye is closed, and that'll be our first animation that we're adding for our player. So the next one we want to do is I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to call this walk animation, and that's basically between an idle and a walk. So you just drag those in, so you'll see it's just got a slight offset on the foot. This isn't the greatest animation, but you can do a lot more complex things with this animation frames. The speed is 5 frames per second at the moment, and we'll control this via a script with our player script a little later on. So great, that's our animations. So for now that's set up. Let's now start moving on to actually creating some collisions or colliders on our player so that we can actually have our player collide with our environment. So in order to do that, we're going to just basically add a collision shape 2D as a child node. Collision shape 2D. So this allows us to define like a bounding box around our player so that we know when it is colliding with our environment. So it's also just good to note that our player should be in the origin over here so that when we do control our player, that it's not offsetted in our world. That could create some weird and strange bugs in your game which are unwanted. And you could actually start scratching your head for quite a long time trying to figure out why this is, just because you haven't offset your sprites correctly or your kinematic body 2D correctly in your scenes. So let's go ahead and create our collision box or a collision rectangle for this. So we'll head over to shape over here and we'll just say basically new rectangle shape 2D. Now what we need to do is we need to resize it. So I'm just going to go over to the resize tool over here and drag this across to try and fit the width of our player, and then we're going to next do the height. Alright, so that basically covers our player. So we now have a collision or bounding box for our player. So this is so far enough for us to get our player going, just to save our player. So save it as player.tscn for our scene, and now we've basically got a player object. So back into this empty object over here, I just want to create a 2D scene and rename that to game. So everything in our game will essentially be a child node of this game object. So it just allows us to, if we ever need to get objects below the game object, that we can refer to the game object and traverse its children. It's just this tree-like structure helps us to organize our game and our project. So always just be a little bit cognizant of how you do that. I will show you basically how we're going to be doing it in this project, but for now just create the game object so that you've got something to start with. Right, so let's save this scene as well and call it the game scene. So just to make sure that this is actually the main scene when we play the game, is we need to go to project settings, and then we want to go to, let me just see, I think it is, let's find it. It's not auto load, no. GD native, no. Config run. Yes, run over here. So basically we just want to make sure that it's our main scene, the game TSN, and that'll make our Godot project run game TSN as our main scene. So for the most part you might want to add your menu of your game or your GUI, your startup menu in here, so you can manipulate this any way you like, and that's why I'm showing it to you, so that you know how to do that. So you can just hit close and we should be able to run the game now, even though we won't see anything at this point. There's nothing in our scene right now, but let me show you why it is important to actually split your scenes like this. So now all we can do to bring our player into our scene is just literally drag and drop our player into our scene. So I'm going to just remove our player quickly because we want to actually start creating a script where we can actually start moving our player around and just doing some animations and so on. So the first thing we want to do is just go over here and create a new folder called scripts. So I've got our scripts folder, and let's create a new script called player.gd. So we're going to be using GDScript. You could use native Visual Script or C# even if you've got the right build of Godot, but for general purpose I'm going to use GDScript because it is cross-platform compatible. So let's go GDScript, and initially let's say it's going to inherit Node. I'm going to show you why that's going to change shortly. So let's create that and let's open it up. So this is our player.gdscript. So for those who don't know, GDScript is very similar to Python. There's a few subtle differences, like func is not def and parse is still in GDScript, and the variables are declared with a var instead of just being used. So we'll just go through this, but it's very simple to work with. You'll see in a second when we start doing some actual scripting for our player. So let me just start off with, we need to just talk about what we're extending, and extending means that we're going to be using that node or inheriting that node. So the node we want to be extending is going to be kinematic body 2D, so that allows us to have some type of physics enabled for the script, and so that we can actually make some changes to our player's velocity and move our player around in our scene. So let's start off with just extending kinematic body 2D. So that will give us the functionality to actually manipulate our player's kinematic body 2D. We're not going to be using ready right now, but it's fine. We're going to leave that in. We're not going to be using process. We're going to be using something called physics process. So usually when you do some physics in Godot, you would want to use this function instead, so that you just make sure that your physics is frame independent, because the process method will basically just update on every frame, and this will be cognizant of actual physics processes. So one of the first things we want to do is we just want to make sure we are going to get some input. So for that, I'm just going to define a very basic function called getInput. So this, all our input basically for our player will come from here. So here is something very important just to note, is that we're going to be using something called input.isActionPressed. So actionPressed has got definitions of various actions. So just to show you where this comes from is you'll go over to project settings and input map. So in this input map, you'll see that there are these various naming conventions which are essentially actions in our game. So what we want to do is we first of all just want to work with UI right and left, which is the left and right arrow keys. So let's start off with that. So we're going to go for UI right, and we want to do an else if for input what is action pressed UI left. Right. We don't want just pressed, we want action pressed. Okay, alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to keep a status of which direction our player is moving in. So for that we need to create a new variable, and we're just going to say moving right, and this is for basically, because our player will initially be facing right, we're going to set this to true when our player is initialized. So here we're going to remove this pass, and we're going to set moving right equal to true. So in Python you might see that this is a uppercase T, GDScript a lowercase t, so just don't get confused with that if you are coming from a Python background. So here we go into input is action press. So if we are pressing the right key, then obviously our moving right is going to be true. If we are pressing the left key, then moving right is going to be false because we are moving to the left. Alright, so that's some of the very basics of the getInput. So what we next need to do is actually apply some velocity and changes to our player. So in order to do that, we're going to start off by just creating a velocity variable. And we're going to then set that to a vector 2 because we basically going in 2D space. I'll initially just have it as vector 2, and then what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be manipulating this based on a speed that we are walking. So for that we will create a var walk speed, and I'm just going to set it as 350 for now. This will change depending on how large your scene is and all of that, so just adjust this value to make sense and make your game look smooth and more aesthetically pleasing based on the movement. So this will differ for everyone and for every project, so just play around with this value and then see what works the best. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to apply this to our velocity. So in order to do that, we're going to say velocity.x, and for our right position we need to basically add walk speed. So we're going to give it a positive walk speed in the right direction. In the left direction it's going to become a negative velocity, so we'll just basically add a negative next to our walk speed to invert our walk speed in the negative direction. And then basically we just need to have another case where we are not pressing any input, so therefore we're not moving at all. So we would want to set our velocity.x equal to 0 so that there's no movement. Right. So what we want to do now is for our physics process, we want to start applying some movement to our player. So in order to do that, it's quite simple. We first of all just going to get our input so that we can pick up what direction we are moving in. Then we are going to use a method called move and slide. So you could use move and collide, but when it does collide with the floor at some stage, that's going to cause some friction and your player might not move very smoothly. So for now, we're just going to use move and slide, and we're going to apply the velocity to that. So that's very simple little script. So if we're moving right, it's going to just set that flag for us, because what we'll do is we're going to use that in our animations now. So just to start off with our animations, so very simple to do this is we're going to play our animation when we are walking. So animated sprite dot play, and we're going to be playing the walk animation. And when we are going left, we're going to be playing the walk animation as well. And when we stop, we want to play the idle animation. Right. So the next thing we just want to do here is to flip our player. So I'm just going to show you why this is an issue. Let's first go back to our player and attach our script to our player. So head over to player over here and just, well, you'll have to first click on script over here and you'll see it's empty, and then you can drag your player GD in there and that will attach your script to your player. So we don't have a player in our game scene, so we're gonna have to bring our player into the game scene. So let's just drop that in there. Might just want to just resize the player a little bit big. If we can, let's try it. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Player a little bit smaller. Okay, great. So let's play this and see if it works. So basically you can see we're now playing the idle animation. The walk, it's basically going up and down. But the thing is that our player isn't looking in the right direction when we move left or right. So this is very simple to fix. And I'm going to show you why this works, because if you look at animated sprite over here, we've got this flag called flip H. So we're going to flip it on the horizontal axis. So if we check this, you see the player turns around in the opposite direction. So we'll have to do this in the player code so that we can actually then allow our player to turn to the right direction that we are moving. So let's go back up into our script and player GD script. And what we simply will do here is just flip it based on the direction of moving right. So first we'll just say if not moving right. Then we want to basically take our animated sprite. So this $sign over here is just a shorthand for traversing to the object and getting an instance of this node object, which we can manipulate. So then let's just say set flip H. So that's for horizontal axis. So if we're not moving right, we do want to flip it. Else we don't want to flip our sprite. Save that and let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so we're completely in the wrong direction now. You just see why that is. So moving right, true, false. If not moving right, sorry, I made a mistake over here. That should be false. And run that, and we're facing the right direction, and when we move left we're facing the right direction. Great. So our player is animated and can move left and right, and it looks correct. So let's now very quickly just add some physics so that our player can fall, and then hopefully in the next video we can just add some basically floors and platforms so that our player doesn't fall through our scene. But for now, let's add some gravity. So that's very simple to do. We want to add a variable called gravity scale. So for this project, I'm just going to set this to 500. We'll play around with that value once again a little later to make it feel more natural. So what we now need to do is we need to apply this gravity scale to our Y velocity. So very simple to do that. In here, we're going to say velocity dot Y, and we're going to apply our gravity scale. So if we play, we should see our player fall. And there our player falls, and all is good. So great guys, that's this first basically big tutorial in this Godot 2D platformer tutorial series. I hope it has been great. I hope it has been fun. I hope it's been enjoyable. I hope you are ready for the next one and that you will like this video and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you can get involved in the next tutorial when it comes out and when I release it. So great guys, thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Cheers.